men that have been leading our worship. I feel like we could take up a collection, go home, and it would have been a good worship service. But we're going to continue on. I feel very humbled to be in front of you this morning in this role. I certainly want to welcome all of our members. You know, you're expected to be here, but a great welcome to all of our guests, those that are on Zoom. I'm very happy to be here with you today. So we're continuing our series in February. I really appreciate the topic that PJ has provided for us. He saw a need regarding Christians in the workplace. I'm going to tweak my portion of this just a little bit. We're going to be speaking specifically about working in a secular workplace. I think most workplaces today are secular workplaces, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. But I want to remind you that a couple of weeks ago, PJ presented much of the scriptural basis on what we're going to be talking about with regard to Christians in the workplace. So I'm not going to re-sermonize, I don't know if that's a word, I'm not going to re-sermonize his material. If you were here February 4th, perhaps you remember this. He had a 7-point sermon. I don't think I ever heard words coming out of a mouth quite so fast. It was like water through a fire hose on a 5-alarm fire. And one of the quotes that I remember is Haley asked PJ, well, how long is your sermon going to be? He never gave her a time. He just said, hang on. So, I'm from the South. I talk a little slower, so it may not quite look like this, but this is the scriptural basis for much of what I will be talking about. So I'm not going to go over and re-sermonize his material. This is not a textual or a topical lesson, but I'm going to call it an application lesson. I really wish this was more of a class setting where we could interact with one another. I know that you have your own experiences, you have your own thoughts and comments that you could make. So my focus is going to be on my personal experience and applications, things that I've studied, things that I've learned over the years from others. And I think most of what I'll say applies to most situations, most ages, and most situations that we're going to be involved in. If you're retired, Charlie, Marlene, I'm retired, it still applies to us because we're still interacting in this environment that we're out in society. So today, given the lesson topic, I need to let you know right off the top, I'm not the expert on this subject. I don't want you to even think that I pretend to be. I will say I've had a lot of decades of experience. I've gone everywhere from sorting glass Pepsi bottles on a bottling line to a mill worker in a wholesale lumber to, as Jason mentioned, a Department of Energy facility enriching nuclear materials. But I've also studied Christian living. Every Sunday morning, it seems, there's something going on about how to live, not just in here in this ecclesia, this group, but when we leave these doors, we're out in the secular world. And a big part of that is working in the secular workplace. So I hope you'll all listen carefully to what I say this morning. This is an important topic, working in the secular environment. Some of it, most of it, maybe you'll agree with it or at least be reminded of similar situations. Some of it you may disagree with what I say, and that's okay. Bring it to me if you want to, and we'll talk. Or you may have a different experience, but please know that I'm speaking these things from the heart and I bring it to you in full openness. I love you, and I love your situation. Now, for those that may be visiting and you don't quite understand where this is going, we're talking about the secular world, the secular workplace. It's where there's anything not affiliated with or not having the mission of a church or this ecclesia. When I say church, I'm talking about this group of Christians that we're all pulling in the direction of having the mission of the church, a godly faith, evangelism as our core mission. That would be a secular environment. Jared, the FAA is a secular environment, I would have to say. So as a Christian in a secular work environment, as a Christian in the secular work environment, our aim is not to be social media influencers, stacking up followers and clicks, but to be Christian influencers. You might have noticed on the slide that I showed a little earlier, there was a little handwritten note when PJ presented his lesson, "Win them over." I thought that was a significant quote from him. Win them over, pointing people to God when we are in the workplace. Point people to God and His Son by the way we talk, by the way we live, by what people see and how we act in certain situations, how we interact with our coworkers, and in some cases, with each other. We're faced with a challenge to live out passages like Ephesians chapter 5, verses 1 through 15. I'm not going to read all of that, but I'm going to paraphrase it heavily and pull out some excerpts. Listen to this. Be imitators of God as dearly loved children. There must not even be a hint of sexual immorality, impurity, greed, no obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking. For of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, that person is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. And that passage ends with this phrase right here. Be very careful how you live. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. I'm going to say it again. I'm plagiarizing. Win them over. So let's influence, not be influenced by our coworkers, for God by our example. My workplace was the Paducah Gaseous Diffusion Plant. You may hear me just throw out PGDP. We worked in acronyms. We had a book of acronyms. And it was a government facility. We had the mission to enrich uranium-235 for nuclear, military, and civil purposes. I won't get into any detail about that. It's just too much. But generally, it was a government facility, not too unlike, I don't think, not too unlike Hill Air Force Base. Does anybody have any familiarity with that? So think of it in those terms. 748 acres of this facility were behind a barbed and razor wire fence. A large facility. It was a self-sustaining facility. That gate would lock, and we could stay in there for weeks. And there was even plans if it had to be food and water and whatever else dropped in, they could drop it in. We had our own water plant, so we didn't have to worry too much about water. But there was a full range of things that we could do there, processes and so on. We pulled enough power to power a city the size of Philadelphia. The reason I'm telling you all of this is because this workplace was a mix of management and labor. There were professional positions, technical, there were industrial positions, chemical production, and environmental restoration going on. It was a very broad gambit, and it seemed like I touched a little bit of everything, but that was good. I learned a lot because of that diversity of skills required. There was nothing routine about that job. The people, I have to tell you, the people were, for the most part, very professional, very intelligent, educated, skilled, hardworking, well-mannered, and pleasant when we were on the job. And for the day-to-day job, we got along. We worked to complete the mission and various special one-off tasks. If you worked at PGDP, you were family of the PGDP. And like family, there were some difficulties and situations, I'll call them, along the way. Now, by that I mean these situations were opportunities for tension and anxiety and temptation to sin, situations that could entice me to think or talk or act as anything but a Christian. Now, this is important because I was in that melting pot of people. Now, please understand, I'm not trying to throw blame on someone else, but I was in that melting pot of people with different backgrounds. And perhaps that demonstrates the secular nature of my workplace of, depending on what was going on project-wise, 1,600 people to 2,200 people in that facility that go beyond the effort or work of getting the mission accomplished or the core job. The reason I'm going to mention some of these things that you're going to hear coming up again is because this can weigh on our minds. This can affect how we think and how we act as a Christian in the immediate moment, or even over time. It just builds up. The gears of the daily job can grind on us. It can negatively affect our Christian purpose and how people see us living our lives. Perhaps you'll recognize some of these as well. I'm not going to put them up on the screen, but let me go through this very quickly. Do you work at a job where you may differ in opinion with your coworker about how to do the job? You have disagreements, maybe even conflicts or arguments. Then there's the frustration of procedures on procedures and work manuals and government entities, bureaucracy, a paperwork burden, layers of regulations, constant training, audits, and so on. We were given the opportunity several times, Jason, for what was called sensitivity and diversity training, and accepting and treating with respect others who were, I'll say, different. Pecking order, I'll leave it at that. Coarse jokes and language, climbing the ladder by stepping on others. And then there were the salary and hourly wage disputes, labor strikes, annual performance evaluations, new contract negotiations, wondering who you'd be working for in the next few months, proposals, shift work, and overtime. I witnessed coworkers cheating on spouses. We're going to start getting a little more gritty, but I'm going to put it out there. Coworkers cheating on their spouse. We had sometimes couples that worked at PGDP, but those couples would meet someone else on the job, maybe start a little flirtatious relationship, split, 2 families are affected or more. Hard to see, hard to witness that. Coworkers would experience tragedy, perhaps trouble at home that spills over into the workhouse. One tragedy that occurred to one of the workers that actually reported to me was after a long shift, he went home. His wife needed to go to the grocery store. He was left with their 3-year-old, and he was so tired he thought, oh, I'll just rest on the couch for a moment. And somehow that 3-year-old was able to jiggle open that sliding glass door and fell into their swimming pool. Tragedy. I'll leave it at that. Some of the less common things, perhaps, was PGDP was a Q clearance environment. We handled classified and secret information and equipment, so there were periodic clearances. The FBI looked into our background. They visited our neighbors. How is this guy acting? What is he doing on his off time? And so on. Some of you know about that. There was a love triangle that occurred between 2 male firemen with a female librarian and the manager of the document center that ended up in a double murder on the reservation. Not inside the 748 acres, but in that area outside the plant. That affected a lot of people. I knew the librarian. It was hard to think that that would occur. When I was working for the plant shift superintendent's office, I was also the incident commander to any emergency. We had a PA system so that any announcement that needed to be made for the general population, you could hear the PA key up, and most of the time it was routine. Hello, PGDP. Good morning. It's 9:03 a.m. The temperature is 68 degrees. The wind is 5 miles an hour from the northwest. It was a PA check. And then there were those times when I was on duty that we had what was called a high-low tone. High-low, high-low. Attention all areas, attention all areas. Plant emergency squad report to C335, cell floor, man down. The nervous system would just go into shock. It's like, rush, get to that emergency and take care of it. We had coworkers that would commit crime outside of work. Well, if you're holding acute clearance, guess what happens? That gets pulled. It affects them. It affects their family. It affects you if you're a friend of that person. Workers would show up under the influence. And because it was a guarded facility, they didn't get past the guards most of the time. Or if they did, the supervisor had the responsibility of reporting. Oh, by the way, I've got a worker here that I think may be under the influence. Security comes, gets them, takes them to the medical facility, holds them, whatever needs to be done. Takes them home. They're not working at PGDP anymore. People would steal from work. Pens, papers, copper, generators. You wonder, how would they do that? Well, if you're a forklift driver and we had staging areas outside the plant, well, you may have to go stage a generator outside. Then after hours and after dark, you'd come pick up that generator, hook it up to your truck, pull it home. Most of the time, that didn't last very long. They would get caught. So another friend is gone. I was able to defend myself for 2 to 3 years in a Part 708 whistleblower lawsuit against me personally and the company that I worked for at the time by an employee. It took up an exhaustive amount of family time and just distraction at the workplace. We had a workplace fatality where a contract worker got into an electrical bus, and my wife was fresh out of RN school. It was right before we were married, and she got to attend to him, and it was not a good situation. That employee died a day later. So we heard about that fatality for years because It was something that when you're in a zero accident environment, and that's what our goal was, zero accidents, that got talked about a lot. And then there were auto fatalities of our employees going to work or leaving work. And think how that ripples through the various people at the workplace. I showed this list to someone, and they looked at it and they said, well, that just proves there is nothing new under the sun. Does that sound familiar? So I want to talk about 4 Christian actions that there could be many more. I could eclipse the 7-point sermon of PJ's, but I'm just going to bring out 4 that I think that I would recommend you consider when you're working or dealing with a secular environment. And again, all of you may not be working, but we all go to the grocery store, we all go to Walmart, we all go to secular environments. And so these things, you might be able to apply these to. And they're in no particular order. Stay connected to your loved ones, your immediate family. Think about Ephesians chapter 5, verses 21 through 33. There's 3 key phrases in there I want to mention. It starts out with, submit to one another. Now, I know this is a letter that's been sent to a Christian congregation, but think about how it may apply in the broader spectrum. Submit to one another. Wives, submit to your husband. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. I'm going to give you some anecdotes or some opinions here from time to time. Here's one of them. When your situation at home is right, your situation in a secular workplace will be better. I think you'll be less distracted, less worried about what's going on. You'll be more content with life and less distracted. Never leave the house without saying goodbye. And it might even be best accompanied with a hug. I know this is cliche, but you married your spouse, not your job, so keep that commitment straight. Spend an abundance of time playing with your children. There was pop psychology when Vicki and I were raising Becca and our son Tim that had to do with quality time. Has anyone ever heard of that? I mean, I'm not sure what it is today, but it was all about quality time. And the idea was, well, if you spent 5 to 10 minutes of quality time with your 5-year-old, that was good for the day. Quality time might be reading a book or just, focused on them. It's been my experience, young children don't have a good concept of quality time. They just understand if mom and dad is spending time with them. So I would recommend quantity of time. That's what they will respond to. I know that's tough, and it gets tougher year after year, but quantity of time. I was working a special project. It went on for 2.5 years, but about a year and a half into that, I had been working so much overtime. It was ridiculous. Leaving the house before the sun came up, getting home way after dark. And I got home way after dark one evening, and my son met me at the front door as I was going in. And I knew it was way past his bedtime. And my words, I'll never forget, to him were, "Boy, what are you doing out of bed?" And it wasn't said very pleasantly. He handed me a little piece of paper. It's folded, He turned around and walked off to his bedroom. I opened the piece of paper. There was a drawing of a fishing boat with two stick figures in it. And one figure was smaller than the other. They had fishing poles and lines out in the water. And the words on the side of the boat were, "Fishing or bust." And the caption at the top said, "Take a day off." I framed that and kept it in my office the rest of my career. Guess where I was that next Friday? My wife told me when that was handed to me, she said, "You need to pay attention to that." And I understood. I learned my lesson by making a terrible mistake. Folks, we got to spend time with our family. Call your loved ones daily. Stay regularly connected to and interact with not only your earthly family, but this family. I'm sorry I got emotional. I didn't plan to do that at all. Number 2, honor the Lord by using your talents. A couple of weeks ago, I think PJ even mentioned this about how Joseph rose to the position of authority over everything Potiphar had, except for Potiphar's wife. Joseph used his talents, and God blessed him. So use your skills and the opportunity of your job to advance. I think that God gives us room and God gives us his blessings to excel and advance, whatever your job position may be. One of my first jobs at the wholesale lumber company, my boss acquired an adjacent warehouse. They used to mix paint. There was hard, dried paint on a concrete floor, and he said, "Steve, I want you to go out and scrape all that up." And it wasn't with a machine. It was with a scraper on the end of a wooden stick. And it was in the winter, and I went out there and I started scraping paint. And each day I would sweep up what I scraped. And one day he came out and he looked and he saw what type of job I was doing, and he actually complimented me for scraping paint. He said, "You know, I'm glad to see you're doing a good job scraping paint, because if I can't trust you with these type jobs, how can I trust you with the more difficult things?" So I learned a lesson from that. Be good stewards of your resources and money. Be content with what we have. I was reading an article recently that there is personal credit card debt over $1 trillion, that's T, over $1 trillion of just credit card debt. And there are families that still are in debt for Christmas 2022, not 2023, 2022. The total personal debt, I guess that includes houses and cars and everything else that we purchase by borrowing money, is $17.5 trillion. Live within our financial means. I'm not saying don't borrow money, but live within our means, and it'll put less stress on our relationships, okay? It'll put less stress on what we have going on at home. Here comes another opinion. Again, it's similar to the other. I feel that it's just better, and we're going to be less distracted at work in a secular workplace when our finances and our resources at home are in order. Be thankful and content with the job that we have. Our career, our job is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It takes time to establish a work ethic with our managers and our coworkers. The reward may come later rather than sooner. And know this very clearly. I'm not saying that the Christian life is going to guarantee our financial success or financial rewards. We're storing up our true riches in heaven. But be thankful for the job that we have. Be content. Men, and especially husbands, and by the way, when I say men, I know this is kind of coming from a masculine perspective, but this applies to ladies too. But men, don't dread going to work. Be happy that we have a job. Your wife, your family, even ourselves personally, we need to know that it's a priority to have a job and to be able to provide for our family. It's a blessing from God. So remember where our blessings are coming from. When we stand up here and we pray, God, we thank you for everything that we got, that we have. We know that what we have comes from you. Well, then let's demonstrate that. Let's purpose in our hearts what we have and give back to God regularly as a priority as we've been blessed. Number 3, I told you no specific order, but this is a biggie. Let God's word be our personal work manual. Okay? Now, I told you a little earlier about all the procedures and the volumes and volumes that we had. Policies, strategies, techniques, all the training. I worked for a company that even had what they called their covenants to work. I also kept a Bible on my bookcase or on my desk. As we saw and heard from PJ, there are passages in the Bible that deal with the workplace. They're everywhere. There are many of them. They're inescapable. 1 Thessalonians 5:22, that I believe I had him read, abstain from all appearance of evil. So when confronted with a dilemma and you're thinking about, well, would this be allowed or not, test it with this verse and you'll come to a good conclusion. When you're given the opportunity at work, be overtly evangelistic. Now, I don't mean that you've got to wear the white collar or that you've got to carry a Bible tucked in under our arm, but don't hide the fact that you're a Christian either. Go ahead and use the opportunity to evangelize when we're at work, and you do that by the way that we live. When we're called to evangelism, whether we work within a church environment or whether we work at a grocery store, an Air Force base, a medical facility, a school, or in an office building, God will open doors for us to share our faith. So let's step through those doors with kind acts and kind words. My workplace facilitated a seminar of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Has anyone ever heard of that book or that study? 2 of those actions were begin with the end in mind. A second one was seek first to understand, then seek to be understood. And from day one, I thought, wow, I've heard all this before. Very Christian principles. Well, as a Christian, what is your beginning, middle, and end goal in a task at work? How are you going to get there? And how are we going to conduct ourselves in doing that? And then always consider carefully and guard the way that we talk to people and the way that we listen to people and communicate with our coworkers. It's an opportunity to either draw people toward us by the way we treat them, and as Jason said, keep that door open, or it could be a cause for them to avoid us if we don't treat them as we should. When possible, express interest in others and their work, their families, and their ideas. As Philippians 2:3-4 says, treat others with earnest respect. Value their ideas, their work ethic, and acknowledge their good work. Handle disagreements by careful listening with humility. Pray. Very important. I cannot recall the number of times that I've just put my head in my hands and said, thank you, God, for helping me get through this difficult situation. And prayer works. It keeps us connected with our Creator just like His Word does. One of the things that I was able to experience, we had a multi-department potluck. I think it was Thanksgiving, something like that. And one of the ladies asked, well, is there someone here that would please say a blessing? And after 2 or 3 seconds, I raised my hand and I said, I will. And so I said the blessing and went on about it. When the Christmas potluck came around, or whatever it was the next time we got together, a person came to me and said, oh, by the way, would you lead the blessing before we eat? Sure, I will. Then on the first year anniversary of 9/11, I was asked to open a memorial ceremony. And even during that ceremony, I prayed for our enemies. And there were a few people that came up to me and asked me about that. So what happened was people knew that I would pray. I had people that would come to my office and they would be distraught about something. One of the ladies came to me and she was going to have a fairly serious operation. She said, Steve, would you include me in your prayers? I said, well, sure. And by the way, close the door. Let's pray about it right now. And it may have taken her a little bit by surprise, but it was good to have people coming and asking for prayer because, folks, I believe in prayer. And that's one way that we can help our coworkers in a secular environment. So, I'm coming to an end. Stay connected to your loved ones. Honor the Lord by using your talents. Keep God's Word as your main work manual. Pray. These are just 4 things that I recommend that you think about, you implement. Talk to your spouse as you go home today or at some point. Think on these things and how they can contribute to you being a Christian in a secular work environment. I've only scratched the surface on this. I hope I've not said anything that offends anyone. I hope some of what I said will cause you to think about your own situation. The bottom line, here's the bottom line. As a Christian working in a secular world, our actions, our behavior, our approach to situations, our source of strength should be no different than how we are living our daily lives as a Christian away from the workplace. At this congregation, the invitation is always open. And so the invitation is extended to you now. If you need the prayers of this congregation, if you need to talk to an elder or any of us, if there's any need that someone has, now's the time to come.